We're going to go to Luke chapter 7, verse 36. And one of the Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him. And he went unto the Pharisee's house and sat down to meat. And behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment, and stood at his feet behind him weeping, and began to wash his feet with tears, and did wipe them with her hairs of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with ointment. Now when the Pharisee which had bidden him saw it, he spake within himself, saying, This man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman that is that toucheth him. For she is a sinner. And Jesus answered and said unto him, Simon, I have somewhat to say unto thee. And he saith, Master, say on. There was a certain creditor which had two debtors. The one owed 5 pence and the other 50. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Tell me, therefore, which of them will love him the most? Simon answered and said, I suppose that he to him he forgave most. And he said, Thou hast rightly judged. And he turned to the woman and said unto Simon, Seest thou this woman? I entered into thine house, thou gavest me no water for my feet, but she hath washed my feet with tears, and wiped them with the hairs of her head. Thou gavest me no kiss, but this woman since the time I came in hath not ceased to kiss my feet. My head with oil thou didst not anoint, but this woman hath anointed my feet with ointment. For wherefore I say unto her, her sins, which are many, are forgiven. For she loved much, but to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. And he said unto her, Thy sins are forgiven. And they sat at meat with him, began to say within themselves, Who is this that forgiveth sins also? And he said to the woman, Thy faith has saved thee. Go in peace. My title today is A Price to Pay. Now I want to do a little review before we jump into this scripture. So our first lesson, we talked about the new wine. And you've got to create a new wineskin. Because if you're wanting something different from God, you got to give him something different to pour into. He will never pour into you something new by you giving him something old. It's not how God operates. He does not do that. So you want something new from God, then you've got to create something new for him. And don't expect him to pour out something new in an old container. Because God is a God of protocols. He's a God of principles. And if you want to experience him in different ways, you will have to follow the protocols in which he says to go by. He gives us the patterns. We see the patterns. We simply obey the pattern, and once we obey the pattern, the promise of said pattern is ours. So all you have to do is find the pattern that you need, you obey and create the thing that it says to create, and then the promise is already yours by virtue of obeying the pattern. Then we went on and talked about weight that keeps us from praising and worshiping and things that aren't really sin, but it's just things that keep us weighted down, mindsets, actions. Could be many things, friends, environments, things you do, things you don't do. And there's these weights that aren't going to keep you from getting to heaven. They're not keeping you from losing your salvation, but they're simply things that are keeping you from your next level. And you can't get to that next level while you still have the weights of these things on you. And then we talked about Leah, and Leah was birthing things out of her pain, and Leah was not getting something from her husband Jacob, so she's trying to get things from him by creating things. And after 3 sons, she realizes that her husband is not going to give her what she needs. She says, forget you, Jacob. I'm going to go to the one that will fill in everything I need. And then she births Judah, which means praise. So she gave God the praise, and because she gave God the praise, she no longer needed anything else from anybody else. God filled the holes in her heart, so she didn't need to bear anything else. So she stopped once she knew, all I got to do is give God praise. And then we realized that Judah had a son. And if you ever need a breakthrough, your answer, the key to the breakthrough, is by praise, because by virtue of praising, you are breaking down something because of your praise. So if you're ever needing a breakthrough, if there's ever a day where you're just not feeling it, and we hear it all the time, we say it all the time, well, I just need a breakthrough, well, I just need a breakthrough. Well, your answer is simply praise. Breakthrough is the offspring of praise. If you praise, breakthrough has to birth out of you. And then we talked about going back to comfort, because we don't like discomfort. And in God, we should always have a form of discomfort, because the Word should always challenge us. The Word should always be affecting us in some way, shape, or form. It should be making us be better about ourselves or striving to be more like Christ. But instead what we do is we go back to what's comfortable with us, and we don't do the things that we know we should do, or we don't do sacrifices like we should because we're comfortable. And we make sounds, and we expect God to move on those sounds even though He's nowhere in the building. And because we're just going through that, we're putting an expectation on God, and God said, I'm not going to move because what you're doing, I'm not there. And we talked about understanding that you may be in a great season but experiencing bad weather. And even though we have great seasons, we experience our worst weather. And we oftentimes don't know how to distinguish weather between a season. We take what was one day and turn it into a season. And then we take that season and turn it into a lifetime, which creates a cycle, not in just us, but then in our children and our grandchildren. And the cycle keeps going because we turned something that was supposed to happen one day, 1 week, 1 month, and we've turned it into a lifetime because we responded inappropriately to what we faced. And when you respond inappropriately, your actions will be inappropriate to what you responded to. And then we got to something that's very interesting. We understand that Judah means praise, and we understand that there's a guy with the same name as Judah called Judas. And we know Judas betrayed Jesus, so we know that I can come into church and praise, but what I'm really doing is I'm betraying God simply to blend with the people. My heart's not it, and I'm just going through the motions because I want to look like everybody else's looks. So my actions allow me to blend even though my heart's not in it. So really what you're doing at the end of the day is you're betraying God with your praise. Exactly what Judas did, because Judas means praise. So there's a praise that betrays. That is going through motions. Doing it because it's a ritual. Doing it because, this is just what we've always done. How did you get there? Here comes in our next lesson. Now, to understand the context of this story that we're all familiar with, we need to understand the culture during that time. Very important to understand when you're reading stories in the Bible. Understanding the culture, because when you understand the culture, the significance of the story gets more empowered because you understand what's really going on. So the culture of this time, women were second-class citizens. They weren't really important. They had very few social and cultural rights. They were given to marriage at a young age. They had no voice in who they would marry. There was little insight to money and possessions when it came to the women in that culture. If they had property or if they did have some sort of money, it would typically come from a relative, a male relative of some sort. It was nothing really that they earned or did. Women were not allowed to study sacred text. Women were not even allowed inside the inner courts. Women had to stay in the outer courts of the temple. So women during this day would be shamed. There were multiple things that they couldn't do that the men could do. So you need to understand that women during this time didn't really have anything going for them. They were childbearers and they kept the house up. That's the extent of a woman during this time. So now that we understand what a woman's culture, what was going on during this time, we also need to understand that there are common Hebrew customs during this time from this culture. And a common Hebrew greeting didn't matter if you were royalty. This was to any common Hebrew. Didn't matter your status. It was just a custom that the Hebrews would do to any guest that they had. So there were certain things that they would do to anyone. You didn't have to be royalty. If you were royalty, you may get a little bit of extra treatment, but it was just a common Hebrew practice. So they wore sandals and stuff, and they didn't have nice fancy roads like we did. It was all dirt and sand, so their feet would be dusty. So when they would come in, there would be a water basin of some sort, and the guest would have their feet washed to not track in all of that dust and sand in the house. That was a custom. Didn't matter who you were. You would also get greeted by a kiss. So not only did you get your feet washed, you would get greeted by a kiss. You would get a food or drink being the guest that would be coming in. You would be offered something for your nourishment from your day, bread, water, or wine, something to nourish you from your day. And then even at times, the guest would be anointed with some sort of oil or something just to cleanse them. So these are common Hebrew customs. Didn't matter who you were. If you were a guest, you could guarantee these customs if you were being invited over. Didn't matter who you were, royalty or not. Common custom greetings. Now, Tuesday night, we went in depth about Judas and the praise that betrays Jesus, and you're going through it with the motions, and you don't really love him, you're just doing it. How do you get to that point? How do you get to the point to where comfort has set in and now you're no longer doing what maybe you used to do? Maybe you used to clap your hands a little bit different, but now some things have happened and now you don't clap them as hard. Maybe you don't sing as loud as you used to. Maybe your hands don't get raised as high as they used to. So how do you get to that point? There is something that creeps in that is a killer to everything it will touch. And you don't even realize it's crept in. It's a destroyer of marriages. It's a destroyer of careers. It destroys relationships. It destroys your church life. It destroys church. It destroys your walk with God. It destroys things without you knowing it. So what is this thing that creeps in that causes you to get comfortable? And it's when you get too familiar with something. When you get too familiar with something, it becomes easy to get comfortable around it, and now I don't have to do everything I once had to do. We see this in dating and engagement and then marriage a lot of times, right? To where during dating and even in the engagement scene and even in early marriage, you did a lot of things that maybe you didn't normally do, or maybe you did it, but now you've gotten familiar with your spouse, and now because you've gotten familiar with them, comfort has set in, and now you don't do the things that you want used to do because now you're comfortable. So Jesus enters this house of Simon, a religious person. He's a Pharisee. And the scripture doesn't tell us this, but because of women's culture in that time, and because of the religiosity at that time, there were probably no women in his house besides maybe a wife and if he had daughters. The Bible doesn't tell us that. But we can rightly guess that there's probably only men here during this scene. There's none probably throughout the house. If there are, there's some sort of servant. So besides that, it's just men. It's a boys' group. It's a locker room. And comfort sets in with Jesus. Why did comfort set in with Jesus? Because they got too familiar with him. Jesus, we've seen you cast out the demons. Jesus, we've seen you fed the people. We've seen you do all of these things. We've seen this. We've seen that. You don't really have anything new for us, Jesus, because we've seen it all. So now we've gotten comfortable with you because we've gotten familiar with you. And because they've gotten familiar with Jesus, he's not even getting a common Hebrew greeting. He don't even get the greeting of a common Hebrew, let alone him being the Son of God. He don't even get something that a Hebrew would get. And we can step back and see this is what our churches look like nowadays. We gather together in an assembly, but we're too familiar with God because we've seen him kind of do everything we need him to do in our life. We know he's there. And we as a people don't even give God the proper greeting he needs. He deserves, because we've gotten too comfortable around him. And we continue to do that, and we're always looking and we're thinking to ourselves, well, we know what's going to happen. We know First Lady's going to sing 3 songs. Pastor may get up there, maybe have her sing a 4th one. Then after that, the teaching will be done, and then after that, we're going home. And on Tuesday night, we know that, well, we're probably just going to sing 1 song, and then the teaching's going to happen. We'll probably get out of there. And see, what we're doing is we're getting comfortable with church, and we're simply stating something because, well, we know what's going to happen, and, well, we know what pastor's going to say. We know what he's not going to say. And we've gotten too familiar with the people. We've gotten too familiar with church. We've gotten too familiar with the schedule. And comfort comes in and says, yeah, you know what? He'll be about 40 minutes. It's about that time now. We'll shut this down and we'll be on our way. And that's what church looks like nowadays. So this woman enters a Pharisee's home. the home of a righteous religious person, along with 12 disciples and Jesus. She enters a place to where Jesus is no longer special. He's no longer the Son of God. He's not even being titled man, Son of Man. He's just not even a common Hebrew. He's not special. He's getting no recognition. He's getting no praise. Everybody around him is just too familiar with him. And then a woman comes in and she's about to shift the entire atmosphere in a place, get this, that she doesn't even belong. She don't belong there, but she's going to change something about that place. And we come into church so familiar with God that we don't clap like we used to clap. We don't sing like we used to sing. And we've gotten so comfortable with God that we want to just come in, go through the motions, do what we want, and leave that same way. And God can't even enter the room because he doesn't even get the common greeting of being God. He don't even get recognized as the Almighty. He don't even get recognized as the All-Knowing. He don't get recognized as being Alpha and Omega. He don't get recognized as beginning and the end. He don't get recognized as author and finisher. He don't get recognized as the rock. He don't get recognized as the great I am. He gets no recognition from his people. His people are simply just going through motions because they're comfortable with that and their heart's not truly in it. And it's just coming in to blend with people. But when church has gotten too familiar with God, he will leave the church and he will go out into the streets to find someone who will praise him. Because maybe God's not in our churches because we're not giving him the adoration he deserves. So we can go to the world and see people who are more Christ-like than the church is because they're giving him what he deserves. So he says, because they're going to give me what I need, I will rest my spirit upon them and not you. So then we get frustrated when the world's operating in things and the world's doing things and the church can't do nothing. Well, maybe people in the world have a heart. They don't look like you. They don't act like you. They don't even do the same things you do. But maybe their heart's so pure for God that God says, I will take your pure heart, I will take your inside, I will rest myself upon it, compared to these other people who may have it all looking good on the outside, and they say all the right things, they wear all the right things, and they do all of this, but it's just a form with no godliness. And it's a cloud with no water. So instead of going to those people, instead of going to the church, where I should be getting it, I'm going to go over here to the world because their heart's actually in it for me. I'll go to the homeless. I'll go to the drug addict. Why? Because their sins have been forgiven more. So those who have been forgiven more love more. And we, as his people, get too familiar with him. We get too comfortable around him, and we don't love him like we used to love, and we don't pour out like maybe we used to pour out. Maybe when you were first brought into the church, maybe it was great. Maybe you did things that you didn't know why you did it, but maybe year after year after year, you've kind of gotten stagnant and well, I don't need to do all of that now. You know, I'm now saved, and I'm kind of righteous now. I'm living holy. I don't need to do any of that stuff I used to do. I'm a lot put back together now. But maybe we need to remember where he brought us from. Maybe we need to remember the pig slump that he grabbed us and pulled us out from. Maybe we need to remember that lost loved one he did save. Maybe we need to remember that miracle he did give us. Maybe we need to remember that healing he did manifest. Maybe we need to start remembering some things because you've gotten too comfortable around God. You've gotten too comfortable in church. You've gotten too familiar with the speakers. You've gotten too familiar with the singers. You've gotten too familiar with the songs and the music. So it's just not like it used to be. But maybe you really need to start thinking about life without God. Maybe you need to start thinking about maybe life if you'd never met him. Where you would be at today. Would you be alive? Where would you even be at? This story has some very interesting points. Now there's 4 accounts. There are some believe that all 4 accounts are one account. There are some believe that there are only 2 accounts of the woman with the alabaster box. So there are 4 accounts. There are some believe that it was all one account, and each Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John described it differently. Then there's some that believe there were actually 2 separate accounts. And 2 sets correlate this story and 2 sets correlate that story. The account in Matthew 26 says not only did she anoint his feet, she didn't just anoint his feet, but she actually also anointed his head. Why is that important? Because the head always represents authority. And what is she doing when she's anointing his head? She is submitting to Jesus as the head and coming up under his authority. She's saying, you are the head. You are on high. And I come underneath you as my ultimate authority. Now, all 4 accounts indicate an alabaster box. Now, alabaster was a hard white stone that was even used in the Solomon's temple. So it was a stone, really. Wasn't like a crate that you're thinking of. Wasn't a wooden crate. And in Jewish tradition, again, this is why understanding the culture is important. In Jewish tradition, a family would purchase an alabaster box. So the mom and dad would purchase this. And they would buy expensive oils and put it in their daughter's alabaster box. So they'd buy this box, and they'd buy all these expensive oils. And they would give it to their daughter, and that alabaster box would be used for marriage. Now, what would happen? Remember, the women get married young. They don't have a say. So, the woman in this story, we can probably guess that because of the context, the age of marriage had passed her. She's probably now an adult. She's probably not a young teenager now. So we know that the season of marriage had probably passed her. Not only had the season of marriage probably passed her, but the lifestyle she lived, no man would want that as a wife. So she has an alabaster box full of ointments prepared for her husband that she will never get. Now, during the marriage ceremony, the young woman would take her box and break it over her husband as the custom to say, I am in agreement with you as my husband in this marriage. So the man would have the woman's hand in marriage, and she would break it over his feet as a sign of acceptance. So what is this woman doing that no man's going to want her? Marriage time has probably passed her. She's probably never going to get a natural husband. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this box and I'm going to go to the bridegroom. I'm going to go to the groom. I'm going to go to the husband that will accept me for who I am. I'm going to give him my alabaster box as a symbol of being my husband, knowing no one else will accept me. So she takes her box, knowing she will never be able to break it open, a physical husband, and she takes it to the king because she wants the king to be her husband. Now in Mark 14 gives us a very interesting demonstration. Mark 14 indicates that she anointed his head, but also indicates something else. In the church, we like to pour our oil out. We like to pour our oil out. We like to have control of how it flows, when it doesn't flow. So we as a people, we as the church, like to take our oil and control how much God gets. Okay, God, here's my oil. I'm going to pour a little bit out. You get a little bit today. You get a little bit today. You get a little bit today. That's what we like to do. We like to pour our oil out. We like to control where it flows, how much comes out. But in Mark 14, he makes a statement. Because in Mark 14, she doesn't pour it out. She breaks it. What happens when you break something? You can no longer contain what's in it. You can no longer contain how fast it comes out or how slow it comes out. You can no longer contain where it goes. So in Mark 14, she has these ointments, she has these oils, and she doesn't pour them out, but she breaks them saying, I can't just pour my oil out to you. I must break it because I have no control over this. It's noted that the oil had significant value and that the oil was probably a life of sin. That the way she got it, maybe she got that by the life of sin that she had. A life that she's not proud of. A life that had taken so much from her. And she takes it, which represents her past, and she takes it to Jesus and she says, my life's value is all right here in these bottles. And I bring it to you, Jesus. I lay it at your feet. I don't pour it on your feet, but I break it, turning my pain into worship. I turn all of these things that I don't like, all this past, I don't want, and I'm not pouring it out. I break it because I can't contain it anymore. Now, we see that when someone's at their lowest. We see people come in and just kind of break out and do things that's not normal to them when they're at their lowest. They don't know what tomorrow is going to happen. They have no hope. And that's typically the only time you see someone in a true breaking out of their praise and worship. It's really the only time you see that. When you're standing on the cliff with nothing left to lose, but there's a point at which you don't care who's watching, you don't care what they're saying, you don't care how ugly it looks. And just like the woman in the story, no one wants them. They've been shamed too many times. And why is it that the only time we see that type of breaking is during those moments? Why can't we just see that breaking in every service for everybody? Why do you always have to be at the lowest of your low to break your praise out to God? Why is it we only experience it and do that when we have no hope? Why don't we do that as the first step and say, I'm breaking myself out because there's no point in going anywhere else? And even though today is great, I'm still breaking myself out in praise and worship. Why do we have to wait till it's the very last thing we do? Why can't it just be every service we have people coming in and breaking out their praise and worship? Not because of what's going to happen tomorrow, but because He's worthy of it.
Yes, He is.
In John 12, this account indicates that the ointment, that the oils filled the entire house. Her praise changed the entire atmosphere. A woman who was not even wanted. Her praise through the doubters and the mockers. When you break your praise to where it cannot be contained, it starts affecting people in the room.
It sure does.
And you have no idea how powerful your worship, because your worship starts tugging on someone else, and that spirit starts to stir something else up in someone else's heart, and it starts to pull them in. Why? Because His presence is starting to enter the room, and His presence is starting to tug on these things, and His authority demands recognition. Paul and Silas, their worship was so powerful, it didn't just set them free, but it set all the other prisoners free. It wasn't just their jail cells that opened. Every prisoner's door was open. Maybe your praise is not even for you, but maybe it's for a family member. Maybe it's for a child. Maybe it's for a parent. Maybe it's for a friend. Maybe it's for someone you don't even know. But your praise will start affecting an environment, and that environment will start to shift something in that person. So your praise may not even be for you. It could be for someone else. You have the ability to walk into a room and tear the walls down by your praise, by your worship. You have the ability to enter praise into any atmosphere. And before you know it, that depression that was once there is gone. The anxiety that was once there is gone. The spirits that once were wrecking that environment. Your praise has now introduced God's Spirit hovering, and now those spirits have no choice but to leave. And before you know, peace starts to enter, and joy starts to enter, and everything starts bowing down to the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords once His presence enters the room, because God cannot ignore praise. He has to come and indwell within His people when you give Him the adoration of being God. First Lady, you can come. Now here's a very important part of the story. Very important part. There's power in your praise and your worship. And when you can push past all the naysayers, all the doubters, when you can push past the people that don't believe in you, when you can push past the people who've counted you out, when you can push past what people think about you, and when you don't care about that, when you just begin to break yourself open at the feet of Jesus, things start to change. Now, Everyone in the room is saying this woman is a sinner. She has all of this money. She has this ointment that could be sold for a pretty penny. She has these vessels. She's wasteful. So you have all of these doubters, all these mocks. She's a sinner. She's wasteful. She could use that for different things. Why is she doing that? And you have all of this negativity pointing to this girl, pointing to this woman. She's doing things that they aren't doing. She's kissing his feet. She's drying it with her hair. She's doing all. She's wrecked it. She's wrecked the environment. She's wrecked this locker room vibe where all these men are, where a woman's not even probably allowed. And so she's doing all of these things that she's not supposed to be doing. She's not supposed to be doing any of this. During that time, women were meant to have a covering over their head. They were supposed to be covered. She's doing all of these things that she's not supposed to be doing, things that can get her stoned, that can get her killed. But she takes it another step. And because she has this covering, because that's what a woman's supposed to do in her culture, she gets to Jesus after wrecking everything and doing everything she's not going to do, and she lets down her hair. She's broke tradition and done something that she's not forbidden to do. This has 3 profound meanings by her taking the covering off of her head and letting her hair down. When a woman would let her hair down, it was a form of punishment or a form of humility. The second was meant to be relaxed and enjoy yourself. That's where we get, well, just let down your hair. That's where we get that from. To not be overly restrained, to be not overly polite, but you can relax. The third was a sign that intimacy was about to take place. So she's humbling herself, unrestrained, without worry of what the men are talking and saying. And she's saying to herself, my life's been a mess. I have a past I have sins in my past. And you know what? I'm going to let down my hair for Jesus, because I've let it down for so much less. Why wouldn't I let it down for the King? Why wouldn't I let it down for the Son of God? I've done so much. My praise has been given to so much less.
Yeah.
How could I not give my praise to Him? I've done so much less for other people, for other things. And now the bride, the King, the Lord is here. How can I not do this? Because we have given ourselves to so much less. How can we not give God what He deserves? This woman's praise and the sacrifice not only cleansed her sins,
Right.
but gave her salvation. Your praise and your worship should reflect where God has brought you from. The size of your praise and worship is the size of your gratitude. If your praise is little, your God's little. Jesus is not even getting a common greeting, and He's God manifest in flesh. We've been with you, Jesus, for 3.5 years. You've told us all your parables. We've seen all your miracles, all your blessings. We've come to church year after year. We've sang your songs. We've heard your teachings. We've heard the preachings. We've listened to the singers. We're comfortable now. We're too familiar with you. We're too familiar with you, God. I know if we call upon you, you're there, but I just don't need you today. I'm good. We're just too familiar. And Jesus is not even, he's been lower than a common Hebrew because he's not even getting what he deserves. So I come to church, I clap my hands, I sing my songs, I give money, I hear the word. I've seen enough God in my lifetime. It's okay, God. I'm good. I'm comfortable where I'm at. I'm familiar with you too much that I know I'm saved, so why do I need to keep trying? And at that moment when a church gets like that, a sinner walks in, not caring who's looking, doesn't care what they look like, doesn't care about the whispers, it doesn't care about the laughs. And that sinner's ready to come in and break their oil upon God and be intimate with Him because of what He's doing. But what if you had a church collectively breaking their oil to God? And that manifest presence begins to overshadow us. What would happen if we as a church could give God what He deserves? What if we as a church could maybe do what we once used to do? Maybe we did this, maybe we did that, maybe we jumped, maybe we danced, maybe whatever. What if we as a church broke our oil to God just because He is worthy? Just because He's worthy. He's worthy from where He's brought you from. He's worthy for what He's doing in your life. He's worthy that He's already in your tomorrow. What would happen if a church, with their praise and their worship, began to break it out? And saying, you know what, my clap's not been hard enough, my song's not been loud enough, my hands haven't been high enough. You know what? Maybe I need to do something different. Maybe I need to break out. Instead of letting my oil pour, instead of controlling it, maybe I just need to forget anybody's here. And I just need to put my mind on how much God is worthy and how much I've betrayed Him and how much I've done to not even recognize His greatness.
Oh, Jesus, help us today.
What if we did it just because we wanted to? What if we did it just because our heart's saying we've given so much more to other things? How can I not give God more? I've given my time to things. I've given praise to other things. I've given worship to other things. I've given time to other things. I've given my heart to other things. And they're not even worthy of
No,
what
they're
God's
not.
worthy. How can I not break out and give him what he's worthy of getting?